The history of Western urban planning and design exhibits a clear dichotomy between nature and culture. This dichotomy causing an evident conflict between urban development and protection of nature. It's still prevalently dominant in contemporary urban planning and design. The aim of our work, our research, our teaching is to challenge this opposition by exploring alternative ways of seeing and understanding the relationship between nature and culture, found in other fields of knowledge, such as political ecology, eco-criticism, and ecosophy. Central in the contemporary debate of urban political ecology and environmental aesthetics is a questioning of the hegemonic notion of nature and the relationship between nature and culture. To be able to confront the current world order and imagine radical socio-ecological change, an ecological view beyond the conventional understanding of sustainability is needed. Further, ecological theorist Timothy Morton argues that what stands in the way of a truly sustainable environmental thinking is the image of nature itself. There is a need for understanding of ecology without nature, from which the social construct of the image of nature as the opposite to culture has to be removed. Here, the thinking of Gregory Bateson and Felix Guattari, expanding the notion of ecology through a broader set of conditions and relationships, is helpful. Including social relations and human subjectivity, this notion of ecology could be a way of thinking, a model for understanding the world, as well as the medium to imagine and project other ways of living and coexisting. So, looking more closely at some of the spatial investigations between the relationship of nature and culture that we have carried out, and in this presentation, we will describe very briefly some of the trajectories and spatial investigations into these explorations. We have explored ways of operating or catalyzing change within global transformation affecting urban and rural areas today. And the investigations and work, teaching, and research we have carried out is developed over many years in practice in academia. But we are just going to very briefly touch on some examples to open and tease your minds and perhaps the discussion. The focus of the work has been particularly relevance and emphasis to climate change, finite resources, emerging technologies, and how we look at socio-ecological development and ethical design. So one of the cases that we worked over many years is Barcelona. And here we develop a number of different projects. We will just mention one of the sort of maps or landscapes or ideas that we have developed. And it's an urban metabolic landscape. And in this case, we are looking at the ways, the flows of energy and matter, urban metabolism, and circular economy. Our work has mainly focused on alternative relationship between these flows of energy and matter produced by the city's official identity and existing local social, cultural, and ecological systems. We approached the city of Barcelona, the neighborhoods, the urban fabric, as a circular metabolic landscape where the output of one of the metabolic processes could become a direct input into the next. Studying the neighborhood of Poblenou as a systems of flows and energy of matter. We have also explored the possibilities through looking closely at social movements and the initiatives around reuse, recycling, rethinking life cycles of products, materials, and social networks that are trying to address on a local level how to consider waste and how to consider alternative ways of living, making it possible for a neighborhood to take care of its output within its own border, imagining a self-sufficient neighborhoods in the city itself. So collected waste from districts is proposed to be processed, as well as incrementally growing park landscapes, given the amount of garbage in the city produced as a physical body that you otherwise never see. This is a drawing that actually addresses a completely different issue, but that might be important just to touch upon, which is also not only the landscape of waste, but also what actually is something to consider very strongly in Barcelona, which is the artificial landscape of the coastline, which is also something that we've been working extensively on, but I don't have enough time to get into this. But it is interesting to both look at the production of amounts of waste and garbage that is happening in the city of Barcelona, in contrast to the constant ever disappearing coastline or beach, and how that is completely artificially constructed, and every year sand has to be dragged from other areas. So it's a juxtaposition that is interesting to look at these two landscapes. Another very quick, and here will be really quick because I suppose time, it's Gothenburg, where we've been interested in looking at urban networks of productive ecologies. Gothenburg is under, has the rising sea levels, with looking at in 50 years, 1 meter rising sea level, both due to climate change, but also to the way the river has been overly densified, meaning that the former flow of the river is now disrupted. So the work in itself and the city of Gothenburg is undergoing major changes in the past decade. And we've been interested in how to develop alternative future scenarios and identities for the city. The city has a strong identity as a harbor city. It's the second biggest city in Sweden. And studying the dynamics of the flooding in Gothenburg and what it affects, you understand the most important and critical points of the city, such as hospitals, the old towns, and important cultural institutions and buildings would be underwater, and it's already happening today. So we have studied natural water edge ecologies, look at different dynamic ecosystems, and how to actually live with water and the fluctuating water levels. Understanding and departing from understanding the coastal edge as a system, a productive industrial edge, but an operative infrastructure. We try to program spaces and interventions where the flooded water could be seen as a resource and the future for Gothenburg, imagining Gothenburg as a city on water. So if we have Barcelona as the juxtaposition of two landscapes and how they relate, and they're in Gothenburg is about the water ecosystems and how we can live on water. And please, my colleague will wrap up the rest of the presentation.
So to sum up, our methodology is using different ways of mapping, analyzing, and understanding responses and tactics to the global crisis in a local context in order to construct alternative scenarios and other models of development. How do we imagine alternative futures and develop spatial practices for a socio-ecological urban and rural development beyond the idea of endless growth? Common for the examples that we describe is an expanded idea about ecology to include social relations and human subjectivity as a way of thinking and understanding the world, as well as the medium to imagine and to project other ways of living and coexisting. Here, a territory, landscape, city, or neighborhood could be imagined to function as an ecosystem of overlapping and productive socio-ecological networks. The idea of networks is developed as a flexible series of interconnected, self-sufficient strategic spaces, a framework based on an understanding of socio-ecological relationship between territories on multiple scales. We see an urgent necessity for a broad understanding of the complex economic, political, and environmental forces that influence urban and rural development and transformation today, as well as an urgent need for holistic, interdisciplinary, and experimental approaches to address these challenges and explore alternative models. To sum up, in their article, Radical Urban Political Ecological Imaginaries, Planetary Urbanization and Politicizing Nature, Maria Kaika and Eric Swinidow ask for a radical shift in how we understand the current situation and how we could imagine a different future. Can you change the slide, Anna, please? There is an urgent task ahead to delve into the complex linkages between discourse, post-political management, and environmental socio-ecological inequalities. It is necessary to ask questions about what visions of nature and what socio-environmental relations are being promoted, what quilting points are being used, and how they are being stitched together, and who are promoting these visions and why, what issues, and whose voices are being silenced in the process, and how are these discourses competing with, altering, and being altered by other alternative discourses. We ask, what kind of futures does the contemporary practice of urban design allow for? And is it possible to imagine other futures departing from alternative relationships between nature and culture? What kind of life do we imagine, and for whom? Thank you.
I will say that this presentation is about the countryside that we leave behind when we move to the cities and the projects that you have presented here in the context of Denmark. And I will go through first the context, then some of the field observations we have done in the research project, and then some of the operations we have carried out in the project. And developed countries globally are experiencing severe demographic challenges as their rural populations increasingly abandon home villages and move to larger cities. We've seen that in the projects before. And as part of this tendency, many rural villages and townships in Denmark face abandonment, decay, and slow but intense transformation. And as a reaction to this development, the Danish government has initiated widespread strategic demolition projects, as seen in, for instance, Thisted municipality up here to the left on the map you can see, in northwest Jutland, which is the case area for our research project. And Thisted municipality is one of several municipalities farthest from two major growth regions of East Jutland, where the Aarhus School of Architecture is, and Copenhagen, the capital of the country. Okay, so just to sum up what I just said, Thisted municipality is in the top right, left of this map. This is where we work in our project. One of the municipalities facing severe demographic changes in Denmark. It's our standpoint that these state-financed demolition projects form a fast eradication of the everyday history of sites and territories in the country. And as a counter move in this project, we argue for an alternative transformation practice. The research project is a research by design project to be implemented in full scale in the depopulating rural station town of Bedsted. And we argue for combining governmental afforestation plans of doubling the size of forest in Denmark with partial demolitions of derelict buildings, as this may contribute to a new direction in the field of radical transformation of abandoned buildings and everyday landscapes. So rather than approaching the afforestation as detached from the town, normally that's something that is carried out in land zone in Denmark, and the demolished sites carried out in the urban zone as cleared from their former content. We argue for heightened attention to what is already there. So remnants of former private homes and gardens turned inside out and brought forward as public small-scale interventions in an afforestation strategy that we propose to expand into the town and weave town and countryside together in a new public domain. Some of the field observations, and this is mostly what we have managed to do. We started in 2020, so last year has been done, and we aim to discover points of interest which potentially can contribute to the collective memory of the site. These are done on site, and I will go through just very briefly some of the things that we have discovered and propose to actually carry forward in the project in the future. Some of these elements from former garden usages, elements from former building building areas that and I will skip these quite quickly, that we propose to bring into the afforestation project as signs, or what we call cues to care, in a large-scale project. So in Bedsted, the living garden remnants will be, to follow Sebastian Marot, extrapolated into a new urban forest as a veridic memory, to follow Julian Raxworthy in his book Overgrown, of the character of site and territory. Some of these observations have led to the first initial field operations in Bedsted. And the main goal of these field operations is, in one-to-one, to explore if, and if so how, small-scale interventions can lead to new site-specific images on the site. In this sense, Bedsted in this project function as an outdoor laboratory for radical transformation and preservation of recent, often neglected cultural heritage that hopefully can be scaled up and explored further in other sites and other regions of Jutland. So elements from the abandoned buildings will be used as the foundation for instance, new public points of interest and platforms for engagement. Here exemplified through a formal restaurant in a forest clearing to the left, and a small-scale prototype developed by my co-author Mo in another station town in the region, Snedsted, in 2014. Also, small-scale interventions in Bedsted use as point of reference some of our earlier work with similar interventions developed in, for instance, Alnarp Landscape Laboratory in Sweden, which exemplify how garden practices can be integrated in young forest structures. In Bedsted, these garden practices hold similarities with the well-known design of landscape park Duisburg Nord by Peter Latz. Even though the scale and context vary markedly, they share rhythm of strategically selected spots with intensive design interventions that contrast a more extensively managed, even wild wooded matrix. There are other theory discussions we carry on in the project. And to sum up, this is really a quick introduction to the research project. But we believe that in radical transformation processes like these, small, inexpensive, and possibly temporary interventions that communicate human intention, particularly intention to care for the everyday landscape and deep history of the site, may be able to offer a powerful vocabulary for design to improve both ecological and social qualities in abandoned or areas that face abandonment. And furthermore, the much needed focus on biodiversity also in urban areas adds actuality to small-scale interventions as an approach to urban green space, as they provide a bridge between intervening in the small-scale interventions and then leaving room for natural processes outside these small-scale interventions, and as such links to the theory of cues to care presented by Joanne Nassauer in her seminal text, I would say, called Messy Ecosystems, Orderly Frames from 1995.
Hello, everyone. My name is Zhong Weijie. I am a PhD student at Eindhoven University of Technology. My doctoral research is about biophilic design, a method to integrate nature into architecture. But the study is to develop a critical reflection of today's greening tendency in sustainable architecture and to develop biophilic design strategies and guidelines to address the challenges of sustainability. Here, I bring some of my research findings, which are also highly relevant to our sessions in Green Dream. Based on several key previous frameworks, I screened out the most important design elements in contemporary urban architecture. I reorganized the biophilic design framework and transformed it into an infographic form, as we see here. The biophilic framework mainly contains 3 nature in design approaches, and with 18 different elements. The first, nature incorporation, it includes the most direct and obvious nature elements. This method is to bring in or we have answered the first question, how to understand nature in architecture. And now we turn to the second, how can biophilic design in architecture contribute to sustainability? In this part, I mapped the benefits of biophilic design and corresponded them to the UN's 17 Sustainable Development Goals. The results show that here that biophilic design can contribute to at least 10 of the 17 goals, especially for Goal 3, good health, and Goal 13, climate change. For example, it can offer the benefits to Goal 3 in reducing stress, decreasing air pollution, optimizing thermal comfort, providing psychological restoration, increasing healing rates, enhancing positive emotion, and encouraging physical activity. It's quite important for recent years.
The first presentation and the third presentation, I think for me, they are very complementary because they're coming actually from different angles. But in both presentations, you have a quite radical different understanding of nature, where nature is really man-made. And I think that that's very interesting. While Andrew, Sam, and Tess came maybe more from a kind of performance kind of approach, I think Wei Ji is maybe more from a kind of experimental kind of approach where, and I think how, if they become merged, I think there's really a huge potential. But I also want to assert, because we had this kind of example of Bosco Verticale here, that is frequently kind of featured as this kind of icon of sustainable architecture. I'm very critical of it because I think in the end, I think a lot of challenges are actually not really addressed. It reuses a lot of kind of resources actually to construct these kind of balcony. It's quite an elitary project. So I think we also have to question whether these approaches on which dimensions they really introduce change. And maybe just as a, yeah, so what these kind of approaches, how do they deal with all these urgencies? And I think there Bosco Verticale is maybe interesting from, yeah, that it integrates plans, but I think it doesn't really solve any problems beyond maybe the problem that the people who can afford like such an apartment enjoy the plants and bees in front of the window.